I've seen a lot of things in my courtroom over the last few decades. I've seen people lie about money, lie about love, and lie about things as small as a Tupperware set. But nothing, and I mean nothing, gets my blood boiling quite like a dog owner who refuses to take responsibility for a dangerous animal. You chose the dog. The dog didn't choose you. And if your dog decides to treat a human being like a chew toy, that is on you. 100%. No excuses. No, he's never done this before. No, she shouldn't have been standing there. I looked down at the file sitting on my bench. Sarah Jenkins, a 21-year-old nursing student. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired you get from studying for finals, but the kind of tired that comes from trauma. She had a thick bandage wrapped around her right forearm and a smaller one on her calf. Across from her stood Ronald Miller. He was wearing a cheap suit and a look of smug indifference that I knew I was going to have to peel off his face within the first 5 minutes. "Bird!" I called out. Bird did his thing. The parties were sworn in. I didn't even look at Miller yet. I kept my eyes on the file. "Miss Jenkins," I started, my voice sharp. "You are suing Mr. Miller for medical bills, pain and suffering, and the cost of your nursing scrubs totaling $5,000. You claim his dog bit you not once, but on 2 separate occasions on 2 consecutive days. Is that correct?" "Yes, Judge Judy," she said. Her voice was small, but steady. I liked that. Don't whimper in my courtroom. Just give me the facts. "And Mr. Miller," I turned my gaze toward the man in the cheap suit. He shifted his weight, trying to look casual. "You're countersuing for, let me see here, harassment and emotional distress because Miss Jenkins reported your dog to animal control? Is that your claim?" "It is, Your Honor," he said, puffing out his chest. "She's trying to get my dog put down. Max is a service animal in training. He's my protector." "He's a menace," I snapped. "And don't give me the service animal nonsense unless you have a certificate from a legitimate agency, which we both know you don't." "Now shush. I'm speaking." I turned back to Sarah. "Miss Jenkins, tell me about day 1. Where were you? What time was it? And what happened?" Sarah took a breath. "It was Tuesday, about 2 p.m. I was walking home from the campus library. I live 2 blocks away from Mr. Miller. I was on the public sidewalk, minding my own business, looking at my phone, not even walking fast. I saw Mr. Miller in his front yard with a large German Shepherd mix. The dog wasn't on a leash. Was there a fence, Sarah?" I asked. "No, Judge. Just a small decorative border, maybe 6 inches high." I looked at Miller. He was already shaking his head, opening his mouth to interrupt. I held up a hand. "Sir, if you speak while she's speaking, you're going to be leaving this room very quickly. Do you understand?" He shut his mouth. His face started to turn a slight shade of purple. "Good. Go on, Sarah," I said. The dog saw me and immediately started barking. It didn't stay in the yard. It charged. I didn't even have time to react. It lunged at my arm. I put my arm up to protect my face, and it clamped down. Mr. Miller was shouting, but he didn't move fast enough. The dog bit me, shook its head, and then finally let go when Mr. Miller grabbed its collar. "Did he apologize?" I asked. "He told me I shouldn't have been looking at my phone because it agitated the dog's prey drive," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. I leaned forward. My robe felt heavy, but my mind was moving at 100 miles an hour. "He said what?" I turned to Miller. "Mr. Miller, did you tell this girl that it was her fault she got bitten because she was looking at her phone on a public sidewalk?" Miller cleared his throat. "Well, Judge, it's a known fact that German Shepherds are highly sensitive to movement and electronic signals. By staring at her screen and walking with a certain gait, she projected a predatory energy that Max felt he had to neutralize. It was a logical reaction from the dog's perspective." I stared at him. I didn't say a word for a full 10 seconds. I let the silence hang in the room until even Bird looked up from his crossword puzzle. "A predatory energy?" I finally asked, my voice dangerously low. Sir, do you have a brain in that head or just a collection of buzzwords you found on the internet? A girl walking home from school is not a predator. Your dog is not a protector. Your dog is an untrained animal that you failed to secure. But, Your Honor, Miller protested, it's logical if you understand canine psychology. I understand human stupidity, I barked. And right now, I'm looking at a masterclass in it. But we aren't even at the best part yet, are we? Because the very next day, Wednesday, you had the dog out again. Is that right? This is where the story got truly insane. Most people, after their dog bites a neighbor, would put the dog in the house, build a fence, or at the very least, buy a very strong leash. Not Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller believed in his logic. Sarah, I said, softening my tone just a fraction. Tell me about Wednesday. Why on earth were you near that house again? I had to go to class, Judge, she explained. It's the only direct route to the nursing wing, I thought. I honestly thought after the police were called on Tuesday, he would have the dog inside. I was walking on the opposite side of the street this time. I was being so careful. I wasn't even looking at my phone. I was watching his house, and he was out there again. This time the dog was on a long, retractable leash. As soon as Max saw me, he bolted. The leash snapped right out of Mr. Miller's hand. The dog crossed 4 lanes of traffic to get to me. He bit my leg and wouldn't let go. A mail carrier had to hit the dog with his mail bag to get him off me. I looked at the photos Bird handed me. The second bite was worse. Deep puncture wounds. Bruising that turned her skin a horrific shade of yellow and purple. Mr. Miller, I said, my voice cold as ice, explain to me how your dog snapping a leash and charging across a street to attack a victim for the second time is logical. Miller straightened his tie. He actually looked proud of himself. Judge, this is where it's logical but illogical. It's logical that Max recognized her as the person who caused a scene the day before. He associated her with the police and the stress of the previous afternoon. So, logically, he sought to remove the source of the stress. However, it was illogical of her to walk by my house again. She was provoking him by her mere existence in his line of sight. She knew he was there. She chose to walk by. Therefore, she assumed the risk. I felt the familiar heat of indignation rising up my neck. She assumed the risk? On a public street? A block away from your house? She could have taken the long way around, Miller said smugly. Sir, I said, leaning over the bench until I was inches away from the microphone, you are quite possibly the most arrogant, delusional defendant I have had in this chair in a month, and that is saying a lot. You think you're being smart. You think you've discovered some loophole in the laws of physics and common sense. You haven't. You've just proven that you are a danger to society because you think your dog has more right to the sidewalk than a human being. I looked at the medical reports, the ER visits, the antibiotics, the missed clinical hours for her nursing degree. You're lucky that girl isn't suing you for $50,000 because I'd give it to her in a heartbeat, I said. But we're not done. I want to hear more about this logical theory of yours, Mr. Miller, because I'm going to dismantle it piece by piece until there's nothing left but your checkbook. I looked at Sarah. Did he ever offer to pay a single doctor's bill? No, Judge, she said. He sent me a cease and desist letter he wrote himself, telling me to stop harassing his dog by reporting the bites. I turned my head slowly toward Miller. You sent her a cease and desist? For being bitten? I had to protect Max's reputation, Your Honor. Max doesn't have a reputation, Mr. Miller, I snapped. Max has a bite history. And you? You have a date with a very large judgment. Looked at the cease and desist letter Bird handed me. It was printed on cheap paper, filled with typos and pseudo-legal gibberish. Cease and desist from further provocative walking, it said. I nearly laughed, but I wasn't in a laughing mood. This wasn't just stupidity. It was a special kind of arrogance that thinks it can rewrite the laws of the land to suit its own delusions. Mr. Miller, I said, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls, you wrote this You actually sat down at a computer, typed these words, and thought to yourself, yes, this is a brilliant legal move. Do you realize how insane this looks? You are telling a victim of a dog attack, an attack your dog committed, that she needs to stop walking on a public street because it provokes your animal. Is that really the hill you want to die on today? Miller didn't even blink. Your Honor, context is everything. Max is an intuitive animal. He senses hostility. After the first incident, which was an unfortunate misunderstanding of boundaries, Miss Jenkins returned the next day with a high cortisol energy. She was looking for trouble. She was essentially stalking the sidewalk in front of my property. Max was merely defending the perimeter. It's logical that he would react. It was illogical of her to return to the scene of a previous conflict and expect a different result. Sir, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining, I shouted. I slammed my hand on the bench, and the sound made the gallery jump. She wasn't stalking the sidewalk. She was going to school. People have a right to walk to school without being hunted by a German Shepherd. And let's talk about this perimeter. You don't own the sidewalk. You don't own the street. Your perimeter ends at your property line, which from the photos I'm looking at doesn't even have a fence. I turned to Sarah. Miss Jenkins, did you say anything to him on the second day? Did you shout? Did you throw anything? Did you do anything other than exist in his line of sight? No, Judge, Sarah said. She was clutching the railing of the witness stand so hard her knuckles were white. I was terrified. I was literally hugging the far edge of the sidewalk across the street. I didn't even look at the dog. I heard the growl. And then I heard the clicking sound of that plastic leash handle hitting the pavement. Before I could even scream, he was on me. He got my leg this time. I thought he was going to pull me into traffic. And where was Mr. Miller during this? I asked. He was standing on his porch, Sarah replied. He didn't run. He just kept yelling, Max, heel, Max, neutral, like the dog was a robot, but the dog wasn't listening. It took the mailman jumping out of his truck with a bag of heavy catalogs to get the dog to let go. I turned back to Miller. You were standing on the porch? You didn't even try to intervene physically? I was utilizing verbal commands, Your Honor, Miller said calmly. Physical intervention can often escalate a dog's arousal levels. I was trying to remain the alpha through calm, assertive vocalizations. It would have worked if the mailman hadn't interfered and created a chaotic environment. That mail carrier actually owes me an apology for traumatizing Max. I stared at him. I really did. I've dealt with thousands of litigants, but this man was in a league of his own. Traumatizing Max? The dog that was currently chewing on a nursing student's calf? You're worried about the dog's trauma? Sir, if you were my neighbor, I'd have moved out within 20 minutes of meeting you. You are completely detached from reality. I looked at the police report from the second day. Bird, let me see the officer's statement. Bird handed it over. I scanned the lines. Officer Higgins says here that when he arrived, you, Mr. Miller, refused to hand over the dog's vaccination records. He also notes that you told him the dog was a certified sovereign entity not subject to municipal leash laws. Is that what you told a uniformed officer of the law? Miller adjusted his glasses. I told him that Max is registered as a private security asset under certain maritime laws regarding personal protection. Stop! Stop right there! I yelled. I felt like my head was going to explode. We are not in the middle of the ocean. This is a courtroom in the United States of America. There are no maritime laws for German Shepherds on a suburban street. You are not a sovereign entity, and neither is your dog. You are a dog owner who is legally responsible for the damages your animal causes. Period. End of story. Now, let's get to the service animal lie you tried to tell me earlier. I pointed a finger at him. You said Max is a service animal in training. For what? What task is he being trained to perform? And don't tell me protection, because protection is not a service task under the ADA. Miller hesitated for the first time. He is being trained for emotional support and deep pressure therapy. By who? I asked. What professional trainer? I am training him myself, Miller said. I have a series of DVDs. DVDs? You're training a service dog with DVDs? That's like me saying I'm a brain surgeon because I watched a season of Grey's Anatomy. It's baloney. It's a scam used by people who want to take their aggressive pets into grocery stores where they don't belong. Max isn't a service dog. Max is a liability on 4 legs. I turned my attention to the damages. Miss Jenkins, you have a bill here from the urgent care for $1,200. Another $800 for follow-up wound care because of an infection. And you're claiming lost wages. Explain that. I'm in my final year of nursing school, Judge Sarah said. I had a clinical rotation at the hospital that week. Because of the infection and the mobility issues with my leg, I couldn't stand for the 12-hour shifts. I missed 2 weeks of clinicals. I had to pay a fee to make them up over the summer break, and I lost my part-time job at the campus bookstore because I couldn't walk the floor. And your scrubs? They were shredded, Judge. 2 sets. They're expensive. I looked at the receipts. Everything was documented. She wasn't padding the bill. She was just trying to be made whole. Mr. Miller, I said, you're countersuing her for $5,000 for harassment. You claim that her reporting these bites to animal control led to Max being put on a dangerous dog registry, which you say has lowered his market value and caused you mental anguish. Do I have that right? That is correct, Miller said. Max was a high-value specimen. Now, because of her vindictive reporting, he has a record. It's like a criminal record for a human. It limits where I can take him and increases my insurance premiums. She did that out of spite. She did that because your dog bit her, I screamed, twice in 2 days. If I'm a neighbor and your dog bites me, I'm not harassing you by calling the authorities. I'm performing a public service, so the next person your dog attacks isn't a 5-year-old child who might not survive it. The audacity of you to stand there and talk about your market value while this girl is sitting there with scars on her arm and leg is nauseating. Miller looked unfazed. It's a logical consequence of a litigious society, Your Honor. People refuse to take responsibility for their own lack of awareness. You're right about one thing, Mr. Miller, I said, leaning back in my chair. People do refuse to take responsibility. But today, that stops. You think you're the smartest person in the room. You think your logical but illogical word salad is going to confuse me. It won't. I see exactly what this is. This is a case of a man who thinks the world should revolve around him and his dog, and everyone else is just an obstacle to be neutralized. I looked at the clock. We weren't done. Not even close. I wanted to dig into the day 1 warning he claimed to have given her. Let's go back to Tuesday, I said. You claim you warned Miss Jenkins before the dog bit her. What exactly did you say? I shouted, maintain your distance. The animal is in a high alert state, Miller claimed. Miss Jenkins, did he say that? No, Judge, Sarah said. He didn't say anything until after the dog was already on my arm. Then he just started screaming at the dog to analyze the threat. He didn't even use the dog's name at first. Analyze the threat? I looked at Miller. Is your dog a CIA agent or a pet? Max is trained in situational awareness, Miller said. He's a dog, Mr. Miller. He licks his own back end and chases squirrels. He doesn't analyze anything. He reacts. And he reacted by biting a human being because you are an incompetent owner. I took a deep breath. I needed to keep my blood pressure down, but this man was making it very difficult. I looked at the photos of the dog. It was a big animal, powerful. In the wrong hands, which these clearly were, it was a weapon. We're going to take a look at the animal control report now, I said, because I have a feeling they had a very different logical interpretation of your dog's behavior than you did. I reached out my hand, and Bird slapped the animal control file into my palm without looking up. He knows the drill. He's seen me deal with dog people before. There are 2 types of dog owners in this world. The ones who love their pets and respect their neighbors, and the ones who think their dog is a reincarnated philosopher king who can do no wrong. Mr. Miller was clearly the latter, and he was about to find out that animal control doesn't care about canine psychology or sovereign entities. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the report. Well, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, the kind of smile that usually means someone is about to lose a lot of money. Mr. Miller, you told me earlier that Max had a clean record before these misunderstandings with Miss Jenkins. Is that what you said? He had no official citations, Your Honor, Miller said, straightening his posture. A few neighbors who don't understand high-energy breeds had made some baseless complaints, but nothing was ever substantiated. Baseless? I barked. I looked back at the report. It says here that 3 months ago, animal control was called to your residence because Max jumped a 4-foot fence and cornered a pizza delivery driver on top of his car. It says you refused to come out of the house for 10 minutes while the man was screaming for help. Is that baseless? Miller waved a hand dismissively. The driver had a scent of pepperoni on him. It triggered Max's foraging instinct. It wasn't an attack. It was a biological inquiry. No skin was broken. A biological inquiry? I leaned over the bench, staring him down. Sir, if a 100-pound German Shepherd corners me on top of a Toyota, I don't care if he's inquiring or foraging. I'm terrified for my life. And then, a month after that, another report. This time, a jogger. The dog chased her for 2 blocks. You were cited for dog at large. You paid a $50 fine, so don't you dare stand there and tell me he had a clean record. I turned to Sarah. Miss Jenkins, did you know about these previous incidents? No, Judge, she said. I only moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago for school. I'd seen the dog in the yard, but I always kept my distance. I didn't know he had a history of chasing people. And why would she? I said, looking back at Miller, because you, in your infinite logic, decided that the rules of society don't apply to you. Now, let's talk about this retractable leash on day 2. I hate those things. They're for people who want to pretend their dog is on a leash while giving them 20 feet of rope to cause chaos. It's a high-tension lead designed for training. Miller began. It's a piece of junk, I interrupted. It's a clothesline with a plastic handle. You had a dog that had already bitten a human being 24 hours earlier. If you were a responsible human being, which is becoming increasingly doubtful, that dog should have been in a crate in your house, or at the very least, on a 4-foot leather lead held by both of your hands. Instead, you're on the porch, holding a plastic button, letting him roam. I looked at the photos of the second attack site. The mail carrier, Mr. Henderson, he gave a statement. He says he saw the dog lunge with predatory intent, his words, not mine, and that the leash didn't snap out of your hand. He says you dropped it because you were looking at your mail. Miller's face went from purple to a splotchy red. That's a fabrication. The mail carrier has a bias against dogs. It's a well-known industry prejudice. I held on to that lead as long as I could, but the kinetic energy generated by Max's acceleration exceeded the friction coefficient of my grip. It was a physics issue, not a negligence issue. I stared at him. I actually took off my glasses. Sir, you dropped the leash because you weren't paying attention. And you weren't paying attention because you don't think other people's safety is your problem. It is the height of arrogance. I turned back to the medical bills. Miss Jenkins, the second bite. You went back to the same urgent care? I did, she said. But they sent me to the emergency room because the puncture on my leg was so deep they were worried about nerve damage. I had to have a surgical consult. Fortunately, there was no permanent nerve loss, but I developed cellulitis. I was on IV antibiotics for 3 days. That's why the bill is so high. And you have the ER summary here, I noted looking at the paperwork. $6,000 for the ER visit alone. She's only suing for $5,000 because that's the small claims limit in this jurisdiction. Mr. Miller, you are getting off easy. Do you understand that? I don't see why I should pay for the ER, Miller said. She chose to go to the most expensive medical facility available. If she had just cleaned it with peroxide at home, it wouldn't have cost $6,000. Her pain and suffering is a choice she made by being medically overcautious. She's a nursing student, I screamed. She knows more about infection than you do. A dog bite is a mouthful of bacteria being injected into human tissue. You don't clean it with peroxide and hope for the best. You go to a doctor so you don't lose the limb. I felt a headache coming on. This man's logic was like a virus. It was designed to deflect, deny, and devalue the victim. Let's talk about your countersuit, Mr. Miller, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. You want $5,000 for harassment. You claim that because Sarah reported the bites, the city has ordered you to muzzle Max in public and keep him in a secure enclosure which you had to build. You're suing her for the cost of the fence? Yes, Miller said, and the muzzle and the loss of Max's social standing in the neighborhood. She has turned my neighbors against me. People cross the street when they see us now. It's emotional distress for both me and the dog. Good, I yelled. They should cross the street. They should run for their lives. You don't get to sue your victim for the cost of the safety measures the city forced you to take because you're an irresponsible owner. That's like a drunk driver suing the person they hit for the cost of their breathalyzer ignition lock. It's insane. It's preposterous. What's your favorite word? Oh, yes, it's illogical. I stood up. I couldn't sit down anymore. I paced the small area behind my bench. You stand there and use these big words, trying to sound like the smartest man in the world. But you're not. You're a man who let a dog maul a young woman twice in 2 days. You offered her no help. You offered her no apology. Instead, you offered her a cease and desist for the crime of being your victim. I looked at Sarah. She was crying now, quiet tears of relief, because someone was finally seeing through the nonsense she'd been dealing with for months. Mr. Miller, I said, returning to my seat. I've heard enough of your logic. I'm ready to apply some of my own. But before I do, I want to know one thing. Where is the dog now? He's at home, Miller said, in his new enclosure. Is he muzzled when he's out? I find muzzles to be a violation of his expressive rights, Miller said. I only use it when I see a high-threat individual approaching. A violation of his, I stopped myself. I looked at Bird. Bird just shook his head. Sir, I said, the only high-threat individual in this situation is you. Your inability to see the reality of your dog's behavior makes you a menace to that neighborhood. I can't order the dog to be put down. That's for animal control in a different court, but I can certainly make sure that this young woman doesn't pay a dime for the injuries you caused. I picked up my pen. I was ready to vent the full weight of the law on Mr. Ronald Logical Miller. But first, I had to address the harassment one last time. You said she was stalking the sidewalk, Miller. Tell me, did you see her with a camera, a notebook, a weapon? She had a backpack, Miller said. She looked suspicious. She was going to nursing school. I slammed the gavel once, just for the punctuation. She had a backpack full of textbooks. The only thing she was stalking was a degree. I turned to the final page of the file. The logical but illogical story was about to reach its very expensive conclusion. I looked Miller dead in the eye. He still had that smug look. He really thought he'd won because he used the word coefficient. I'm going to give you a lesson in physics, Mr. Miller, I said. It's called the law of consequence, and it's about to hit you like a ton of bricks. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've developed a very high tolerance for people who are a little slow on the uptake. But I have zero tolerance for people who think they can use a thesaurus to hide the fact that they are fundamentally irresponsible. Mr. Miller was standing there looking at me like he was a misunderstood genius and I was just a simple town judge who didn't understand the complexities of his security asset. Mr. Miller, I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. Let's revisit your assumption of risk theory. You said it was illogical for Miss Jenkins to walk by your house on Wednesday after being bitten on Tuesday. You called it provoking the dog. Tell me, do you own the air above the sidewalk across the street from your house? No, Your Honor, but do you own the pavement? Do you pay the city for the exclusive right to clear the area of all human life within a 50-foot radius of your front porch? Of course not, Miller said, his voice dripping with that condescending, logical tone. But a reasonable person, having encountered a territorial predator the day before, would have the survival instinct to avoid that territory. By returning, she signaled to Max that she was a persistent threat. Logically, he responded to the persistence. It's basic behavioral science. It's basic garbage, I snapped. A public sidewalk is not your dog's territory. It is a public thoroughfare. If I walk past your house 10 times a day, I have the right to do so without being eaten. You don't get to claim the neighborhood as your dog's private kingdom. And let's talk about this survival instinct. Her survival instinct told her to walk on the opposite side of the street. She did exactly what a reasonable person would do. She gave you space. And what did you do? You gave your dog 20 feet of rope and then dropped the handle. I looked at Sarah. Sarah, when you saw him on the porch that second day, did you say anything? Did you wave your arms? Did you do anything that a behavioral scientist, and I use that term loosely, like Mr. Miller might interpret as a threat? I didn't even breathe, Judge, Sarah said. I was literally trying to make myself as small as possible. I was looking straight ahead, walking fast. I heard him say, Max, alert. That's when the dog started lunging. I whipped my head toward Miller. You said, Max, alert? Why? Why would you say that when a girl is just walking home? It's a command to bring the dog to a state of readiness, Miller explained, as if he were teaching a class. I noticed her high cortisol gait. I wanted Max to be aware that a stressed individual was approaching. It's part of his training to recognize and monitor external stressors. It's logical to prepare the animal for a potential interaction. It's logical to muzzle the dog, I screamed. It's logical to put the dog in the house. You didn't want to monitor a stressor, Miller. You wanted to play big man with a big dog. You were using that dog to intimidate a 21-year-old girl because she had the nerve to report you to the police the day before. You weren't training him. You were weaponizing him. I looked at the photos of the dog again. Max was a beautiful animal, but in the photos, his ears were pinned back, his teeth were bared, he looked miserable. You're ruining that dog, I said, my voice heavy with disgust. A dog like that needs a job and a leader. Instead, he has a man who reads sovereign citizen handbooks and thinks kinetic energy is an excuse for negligence. You are the reason people are afraid of German shepherds. It's not the breed. It's the owner. It's always the owner. I turned my attention to the financial fallout. Sarah had provided a letter from her nursing program. Bird, give this to the defendant. I want him to read the logical consequences of his actions. Miller took the paper, squinting at it. Read the highlighted part, Mr. Miller, I commanded, out loud. Miller cleared his throat. Due to the severity of the infection and the physical limitations caused by the injury, Miss Jenkins was unable to complete her required clinical hours for the spring semester. As a result, she has been placed on a mandatory leave of absence and must retake the clinical block at a cost of $3,400 in additional tuition and fees. $3,400, I repeated, plus the medical bills, plus the lost wages, plus the cost of the clothes you let your dog turn into confetti. And you have the gall to stand there and ask her for $5,000 because your dog's social standing has been damaged? She didn't have to take a leave of absence, Miller muttered. She could have used crutches. My cousin had a broken leg and— I don't care about your cousin, I yelled. She's a nurse. You can't do a clinical rotation on a cardiac ward while hopping around on crutches with a seeping leg wound. Use your head for something other than a hat rack, sir. You have fundamentally altered this young woman's life. She's a year behind in her career now because you couldn't be bothered to hold on to a leash. I looked at the total. $5,000 was the max I could give her. It wouldn't even cover the tuition and the ER bill, let alone the pain, the fear, and the scars she'd carry for the rest of her life. Mr. Miller, I said, you said earlier that your story was logical but illogical. I'm beginning to see what you meant. It is logical that a dog with an irresponsible owner will bite someone. It is illogical that a person as clearly dense as you has been allowed to keep that animal for this long. But here's the most logical part of all. When you cause damage, you pay for it. Miller started to speak, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished. We need to talk about your maritime law defense one more time, because it gave me a good laugh, and I think the audience deserves to hear why you think you're exempt from the laws of this city. It's not a defense, Your Honor. It's a jurisdictional reality, Miller said, regaining his smugness. My property is held in a private trust. Under the 1871 Organic Act, municipal codes regarding vicious animals do not apply to private property held in fori. Stop! Just stop! I was laughing now, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who has reached the end of her rope. Bird, does he look like he's on a boat? Do you see a mast? Do you see a sail? Do you smell salt water? Bird looked up, deadpan. No, Judge, just a lot of hot air. Exactly. I turned back to Miller. You aren't on the high seas, Mr. Miller. You are in a courtroom. There is no private trust that allows your dog to chew on people. You are a citizen of this state, and you are subject to its laws. And those laws say that if your dog bites someone, especially twice, you are strictly liable. I looked at Sarah. Miss Jenkins, do you have any permanent scarring? Yes, Judge, she said. She pulled up her sleeve to show a jagged, raised scar on her forearm. Then she pointed to her calf. The one on my leg is worse. It's still numb in the center. Mr. Miller, look at that scar, I ordered. Miller glanced at it for a split second and then looked away. Scars are a natural part of the healing process. It shows the body is working correctly. It's a logical outcome of, if you say logical one more time, I'm going to have Bird escort you out of here, and I'm going to rule against you by default, I screamed. I have had it with your word games. You bit her. Your dog is an extension of you. You might as well have walked up to her and stabbed her with a fork twice. That is how the law sees it. I looked at the clock. I was ready to wrap this up, but I wanted to make sure the record reflected just how dangerous this man's mindset was. One last question. Mr. Miller, I said, my voice now very quiet, if Sarah walks past your house tomorrow, what is going to happen? Miller hesitated. He looked at the camera, then back at me. If she maintains a respectful distance and doesn't project hostile energy, Max will remain in his enclosure. But if she continues to harass us by her presence, that's it, I said, picking up my pen. I've heard enough. You haven't learned a thing. You still think she's the problem. You still think the sidewalk is your territory. You are a disaster waiting to happen. I started writing my judgment. My hand was moving fast, the ink slashing across the paper. I could feel Miller's eyes on me, probably trying to calculate the kinetic energy of my pen. You came in here with a countersuit for $5,000, I said, not looking up. You claimed harassment. You claimed market value loss. You claimed emotional distresses for a dog. Let me be very clear. Your countersuit is dismissed. It is frivolous, it is insulting, and it is, to use your favorite word, utterly illogical. I looked at Sarah. Miss Jenkins, I'm awarding you the full $5,000. It's the maximum this court can allow. If I could give you 15, I would. I am also going to forward a copy of my findings to the district attorney's office to see if they want to pursue criminal negligence charges for the second attack, because dropping a leash on a known dangerous animal isn't an accident, it's a crime. Miller's mouth dropped open. You can't do that. That's a violation of... I just did it. I slammed the gavel. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $5,000. We are adjourned. I stood up, my robe billowing behind me. I didn't even wait for Miller to start his next logical protest. I walked off that bench with one thought in my mind. Some people shouldn't even be allowed to own a goldfish, let alone a German shepherd. I stepped into my chambers and closed the door, the sound of Miller's voice still echoing faintly in the hallway, probably explaining the physics of the gavel to Bird.